And this morning we're looking at, it's actually kind of a difficult text. Our New Living Translation softens what is a little more abrupt and in your face from the original text. But if you would turn to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verses 25 through 33, and it will be on the screen before you. The only bad part about that is I always like to have people have their Bibles open during the message, so even better if you have a Bible or some kind of tablet with that text so that you can track with your eyes the things we are talking about and you're hearing with your ears. And some of you, if you picked up a Bible on the way in, have the NIV. And when I wrote this message, I did so on the basis of the NIV, so I may make some comments about that. But the text before us is the NLT, which stands for the New Living Translation. And the New Living Translation is a little more of what we might call a free translation. It started off, before it was the New Living Translation, it was just the Living Translation. It was done by one person. Which is not always a good thing, because that one person, no matter how smart they are, they're not completely smart, and they might have their own biases. And anyway, the New Living Translation was done by a team of scholars, and it's a fine translation, but they had a little more freedom to kind of pick up the sense of the text, and we find some of that in our translation before us. And again, maybe in the message I might comment on the NIV versus the New Living Translation as we go through the passage. Because again, the New Living Translation is easier to understand, but it doesn't make this passage as shocking as it perhaps originally sounds. So Luke 14, beginning then at verse 25. A large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, "If you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else, your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. But don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, 'There's the fellow who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it.' Or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the 20,000 soldiers marching against him? And if he can't, he will send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while the enemy is still far away. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own." Are you a fan of Jesus, or are you a follower of Jesus? During his earthly ministry, Jesus had a lot of people who belonged to that first category called fans. Some people were dazzled by his amazing miracles. He could heal sicknesses. He could make people who were lame walk. He could turn water into wine. He could even change the weather. Still other people were impressed by his storytelling ability. He could weave a tale together in such an amazing way that people could remember every little detail about the story he told. Others were impressed with his answering ability. When his opponents came after him with these tricky, hard questions, he had a clever way of kind of turning the question on its head so that now, instead of Jesus being on the spot, now his questioners were on the spot. A good many people, though, were just looking for a handout, for some food that would stop the growling in their stomach. Many more, though, were hoping he would be a revolutionary. He would be somebody who would lead the charge against Rome and its oppressive power. And so, for all these reasons, little wonder Jesus had a lot of fans. Little wonder our text starts off by saying, well, a large crowd, not a small crowd, not a medium crowd, but a large crowd was following Jesus. Now, Jesus has today still a lot of fans. In fact, I'm afraid that maybe even here this morning we have some people who are just fans of Jesus. These are people who see Jesus as what? A solution for their troubled marriage. Or they see Jesus as a fix for their financial failures. Or they see Jesus as, well, a moral example for their kids to follow. Still other people are in church today, not because they're a fan of Jesus, but because they're a fan of their preacher and his or her inspiring messages. Or they're in church today because of the worship team, and again, the way in which they inspire them in worship. But none of this is good, because Jesus really doesn't want fans. Jesus wants followers. I mean, a fan is somebody who's doing, well, what you're doing, actually. Kind of just sitting back, comfortable in your chair and kind of observing, watching, maybe cheering on an athlete, saying, go important person, go. But a follower, well, you're not going to be surprised, a follower gets up and follows. Yeah, that's right. It's one thing for me to stand here this morning in front of you as a fan of Michael Phelps. My oldest daughter was a far above average swimmer, and as a result, I kind of became interested in swimming, and so I became a fan of Michael Phelps. And it wasn't hard for me, this past Olympics, just to sit at home in my big easy chair, my big screen TV, cold drink in my hand, and say, "Go, Michael, go." That was pretty easy. It'd be quite another thing, though, for me to become a follower of Michael Phelps. I mean, I don't know if I want to move from, Michigan to Phoenix. I don't know if I'm ready to give up my seminary job and to say goodbye to my wife and my kids and my grandkids and then swim, thousands and thousands of meters in the morning, wolf down all kinds of calories in between, and then do it all over again in the afternoon or early evening. It's one thing for you to sit here this morning in church as a fan of Jesus. I suggest to you it isn't that hard. I mean, what I can tell, it's not hard to be a fan of Jesus here at inSpirit. I mean, church doesn't start till 10. Huh. I mean, I had like all kinds of extra time this morning. I used to start at 9:30, and there was food over here when I came in. I didn't even have to do anything for breakfast. I mean, I don't have to get dressed up. I can sit in the back. I mean, we've got Wi-Fi in this church. I can do something else during the message if I want to. I can give a little bit of money, that's not too bad. And I can help out with one or two things as long as it doesn't cramp my style or suck up too much of my free time. I'm just saying, being a fan of Jesus here at inSpirit doesn't have to be that hard, is it? You see, what I'm hoping you're beginning to see is that being a follower of Jesus, not a fan, a follower of Jesus ain't easy. In fact, in the title of my message this morning, Discipleship is demanding. Discipleship is demanding. And in fact, in our text, it's maybe hidden a little bit again in the New Living Translation, but not once, not twice, but 3 times Jesus lays down a demand. And what's more, Jesus says, if you don't meet this demand, you cannot be my follower, disciple. Yes, exactly right. And don't think that these demands are only for a select few, for like an egghead professor from Calvin Seminary, or, for Pastor Randy, and, we've got some people on the worship team, these demands are for them, and we've got a few eager beavers, overachievers, every church has them, No. In fact, every one of these demands, again, it's hidden in our translation, but in the original Greek, it's very generic. It's very general. Verse 26 more literally says, if anyone, the next verse 27, and anyone, and verse 33, the last verse says, any of you. And what this means then is these 3 demands we're about to talk about are aimed at every single person here this morning. These 3 demands are aimed, frankly, at you. Now, the first demand is, yes, shocking. I didn't hear any gasp when I read it. Maybe you've heard it before, or maybe you missed it, but it's pretty shocking, and it's found there in verse 26. Our text says, if you want to be my disciple, you must, and then the NIV throws in, that's not in the text by comparison, but Jesus says, you must hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. And that's the part we should go, huh? I'm supposed to hate family members? Huh? What about dear old mom and dad? The ones who brought me into life, the ones who changed my dirty diapers, the one who went to all of my sporting events, even though I sat on the bench most of the time, the ones who went to my plays, even though I thought they were boring, the ones who paid my way through college, the ones who still slipped me money, even though I'm more than capable to provide for myself. I'm supposed to hate them? That this is not what Jesus means is clear from what Jesus says, elsewhere, not even in the Gospel of Luke. Earlier in Luke, for instance, Jesus says, this is 10:27, Jesus says, love your neighbor. And so mom and dad and family members are neighbors, and we're supposed to love them. And just a little later in Luke 18:20, Jesus says more specifically, honor your father and your mother. And so it is clear that Jesus does not literally want us to hate father and mother. So, then what does he mean? Well, the key lies in knowing that hate is an Old Testament way of saying love less. Hate is an Old Testament way of saying love less. So, for example, maybe in the Old Testament, this guy named Jacob, he had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. And so in one verse we read, Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. And then the very next verse says, and Leah was hated. Those aren't 2 different points. Those are 2 different ways of saying the same thing. Some of you don't look very impressed. Okay, so I'll give you another Old Testament text. Okay, so from Malachi, and actually it's quoted quite a few times in the New Testament. You know this verse. God says, quote, I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. That's right. God didn't literally hate Esau. He loved Jacob more. And that's why your New Living Translation, right? It says, you must, by comparison, right, hate everyone else. In other words, you've got to hate your family. You've got to love them less, your family members, than you love Jesus. Now, don't think for a second. It's not that exciting. Someone's just walking in over here. I'm losing some of you, right? Okay, there we go. Yeah. Good. Now, don't think for a second that understanding hate as love less in any way downplays the demanding character of discipleship. Because if you lived in the first century and you were going to be not a fan of Jesus, but a follower, you would get pushback from your family. Oh, yes. You would get big pushback from your family. That shouldn't be hard for us to understand, because still today in many parts of the world, in many especially Muslim parts of the world, if you're a follower of Jesus, you get big pushback from your family. In fact, you surely have heard of things called honor killing, haven't you, right? Haven't you heard about that? It's not so crazy. It happens here even in North America. It happens multiple times all over the globe. When somebody becomes a follower of Jesus and they bring shame to their family, and the rest of the family members, usually a male family member, feels like they have to end your life to somehow restore the honor of the family. Well, I guess that sounds kind of strange or weird to a lot of white folk living in West Michigan. So, okay, let's talk about us then. Because I want to know whether you love Jesus more than you love your family. Because I'm not so sure you do. I want to know whether you love Jesus more than you love your family. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, it's important to love your family. There are biblical texts that talk about the responsibilities we have toward our spouse and our children, right? But I see way too often how love for family trumps love for Jesus. So if you're a disciple of Jesus, for instance, are you willing to invest time in somebody in your neighborhood? Right? Somebody in your neighborhood who doesn't know Jesus. And you're saying, well, why would I do that? I've got no time in my social calendar to meet all my family obligations. How in the world am I going to fit in somebody, from my community? Well, dear friends, how in the world, if you don't have no contact with your neighbor, whoever he or she may be, how are you going to invite them next week to this church? How are you ever going to have a chance to minister to them, to share with them the fact that you are a follower of Jesus? If you're a disciple of Jesus, are you willing to serve in this church? Right? When the leadership comes to you and says, we think you have the gifts for this. And, what do you do then? Do you kind of pull out the family card? You say, oh, thank you for asking. It's such an honor, but I got my little family card over here, I've got to make sure that I don't neglect my family, so I would love to help, but sorry, family comes first. You can't argue with that. Well, Jesus says you can. What if Jesus calls your son or daughter or your grandson or your granddaughter to serve him somewhere away from West Michigan? Jesus does that, He calls us to follow him to, doesn't even have to be far away places, but certainly places away from family, right? And so how do you react, Mom and Dad? How do you react, Grandma and Grandpa? You say, now, are you sure, honey? Can't you just serve Jesus over here? Lots of places over in West Michigan, where you can do that kind of thing, close to us, where we can enjoy you and your kids. If you're a single person and you think about somebody you're dating, does it dawn on you that, the kind of person that you might date and potentially marry, that relationship is actually less important than your relationship with Jesus, or that your relationship with Jesus ought to be a big part of whom you ought to date and marry? You see, if you're not a fan, if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to love Jesus more than your family. Well, that was the first demand, and that's the one I think we probably would find shocking. But Jesus here is actually would, I'll say it this way, freak out over the second one. It's there in verse 27. There's a word in verse 27 which would have, as soon as Jesus here has heard it, would have, inside the gut, fear would have started building. Verse 27. And if you do not carry your own cross. and follow me. You cannot be my disciple. Now, we don't freak out over the word cross, right? Because as Christians, we think of the cross in more positive ways. We kind of see it as a symbol of, well, not death, but life, right? Because of what Jesus did on the cross, He paid for our sins, and we have eternal life. And so Christians, we're not Catholics, but we still have symbols of the cross, right? Lots of us have maybe jewelry, a little piece of jewelry on our neck. And we sing songs about the cross that I think, I don't want to be disrespectful, but kind of sentimentalize the cross. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross. That sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? I mean, I can see a hill, the setting sun, Or, Jesus, keep me near the cross. When was the last time you sang or prayed, Jesus, keep me near the electric chair? Or, when I survey the wondrous cross. See, if you live in the first century, you don't use the word wondrous before the word cross, ever. Because the Romans didn't invent crucifixion, but they magnified it. They used it. They used it as they didn't use it as a way to kill people. There are a lot of easier ways to kill people. No, they deliberately used crucifixion to send a message. People literally hang naked on a cross for days because they're like billboards. I mean, you hang people in public places so that everyone around knows what happens when you mess with Rome and Roman power. And so no wonder Jesus' followers would have freaked out when He said, unless you take up your cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. And today, we've trivialized this expression, bearing one's own cross. I have this, someone will be talking with me and they'll talk about, they've got this car problem, and, I've got this ache in my leg, it's so annoying, and, my teenager is giving me gray hair, and my 401k has been tanking lately, this is really frustrating. I can't retire now as soon as I wanted to, and then after saying those kind of things, they'll say, well, I guess that's the cross I have to bear. Dear friend, there's nothing small, there's nothing trivial about taking up your cross and following Jesus. Because, you see, if you're a follower, not a fan, if you're a follower of Jesus, there is going to be pushback. I'm not hiding the fact that's crystal clear. Even in safe Christian West Michigan, there is pushback. People who think we're a little nuts. People who think we're a little crazy. So I want to know whether the members at inSpirit are willing to do this. Whether you're willing to experience pushback for being a follower of Jesus. Or if you're saying, oh, sheesh, I didn't sign up for that. I thought inSpirit was like a really positive rah-rah-rah church. You join inSpirit and everything goes great in your life. There's an ad in Leadership magazine. Leadership magazine is a Christian magazine, and they had it's not an ad, it was like a comic. So I want you to picture a church, not at all like this church, so a traditional church, like steeple, cross on top. But don't imagine the church, imagine the sign in front of the church. Okay, the sign in front of the church, and the sign says, The Light Church, L-I-T-E. This is a few years ago with all those beer commercials. Tastes great, less filling, light. So the sign in front of the church says The Light Church, L-I-T-E. Home of the 7% tithe, the 10-minute sermon, and the 30-minute worship service. We have only 8 commandments to follow. You choose which 2 to ignore. Everything you ever wanted in a church, ... and less. But again, dear friends, being a follower of Jesus is by no means an LIT experience. It's not an insignificant matter. To take up your cross and follow Jesus means that you're going to experience pushback. What it means is that you love Jesus not only more than your family, but you love Jesus even more than your own life. Well, the third demand, it comes at the end of our passage. Jesus has these two little parables, where he says, don't sign up too fast for this discipleship stuff, make sure you understand the cost. And at the very end, he has something in verse 33 that goes like this. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. So when I first looked at this passage, I thought the third demand was anticlimactic. I mean, compared to hating mom and dad, compared to crucifixion, cross, I mean, this stuff about possessions didn't sound so bad. But then I started thinking a little bit about it some more, and I realized I shouldn't underestimate the allure, the power of possessions, especially when you live in a materialistic culture and age like we do. In fact, I could see it in my own life. So I graduated from seminary a number of years ago as a student, and then instead of taking a church as a pastor, I started 5 years PhD program. And during those 5 years of PhD program, I taught at a school, but I also served as an interim pastor. So the churches were vacant, they had no minister, and they had something that I wanted, something that your church probably doesn't have. They had a parsonage. You know what a parsonage is? A manse. That's just a fancy word for a house that the minister lived in, yeah. And so if the church was vacant, that meant that they had a house that was vacant, and I had a growing family, and so this was like perfect. And so for 5 years, I served actually 4 different churches for different periods of time. I was their interim pastor. And what that meant is, for 5 years, I didn't have my own house. I lived in the church's house. And what that meant is, for 5 years, I didn't have that much in our house. I mean, we had a growing family, but we just had simple stuff. We didn't know, we were just still students. We didn't know where we'd end up going. It just seemed kind of silly to buy anything, at that stage. But then after 5 years, glorious day, I got the call to the New Jerusalem. Yeah, I was going to be professor of New Testament at Calvin Theological Seminary, yes. So my family moved to Calvin Seminary. And we professors make a lot of money. And so I took all that money and I bought myself a big house. And so now for, 24, almost 25 years, I've been thinking a lot about my house, whether my house is as big as your house. And I've been thinking about the things in my house, whether the things in my house are as cool and as impressive as the things in your house. And of course, I didn't start off this way. I mean, it just kind of happens over time, right? When you live in a materialistic age, when you live in a culture where people equate happiness with stuff, even egghead professors who should know better, right, get caught up with the god of stuff. And so I wonder whether you, like me, have developed this bad habit of just being a little too interested in your stuff. Whether we need to be reminded that our stuff actually isn't our stuff, it's God's stuff. And God is pretty clear that if He gives us a lot of stuff, He expects us to use our stuff, not to build ourselves up, but to build up the body of Christ, the church. And what's more, I've seen this, as a pastor, because you deal with people, facing death, and you realize you can't take any of your stuff with you when you die. Because when you die, it makes no difference whether you have a house or you don't have a house. When you die, it makes no difference whether you got a lot of cool stuff in your house or you got, nothing. I mean, there's only so much room, in a hearse. None of that stuff is going with you. In fact, when you die, there's only one thing that matters. When you die, there's only one thing that is that can give you a sense of comfort and peace, even in that great moment, and that is whether, I don't know if these words are familiar to you, whether you belong, body and soul, in life and in death, to your faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. You see, when you die, the only thing that matters is whether you love Jesus more than your stuff. Well, at this point, I'm a little nervous, so yeah, we're getting almost a little long. I guess we started on time, so, well, I'm not really nervous about being long, though. I'm actually nervous about you listening. You've been listening carefully. It's nice and quiet in here. You've been paying attention, right? And you've heard me. You say, okay, demand number 1, demand number 2, demand number 3. And you might then think, oh, these are the 3 things that I have to do in order, to be a follower of Jesus. And you have to be careful with that way of thinking. We have a name for us, so it's preacher types. We call it legalism or works righteousness. And so before we're done, we have to ask an important question. And the question is this: what about grace, right? How does grace fit into this business of discipleship? Well, I'm going to say something paradoxical, right? Contradictory. And it goes like this. You can get something for free, but it will still cost you. You can get something for free, and it will still cost you. So let's imagine that I grew up in Canada, in eastern Ontario as I did, on the edge of the St. Lawrence River as I did, and let's imagine as a kid I got fascinated with all these boats going by, especially these international boats, and it was a little nerdy, but hey, that's me. Got the binoculars out, looked at the flag, the name, and got the globe out, where do all these ships come from all over the world. And anyway, living that way with that kind of experience, I developed a lifelong dream of sailing solo around the world. That's my dream, to sail solo around the world. But it's an impossible dream because it takes too much money. I haven't got enough money, to buy the right kind of ship that I need, to sail solo around the world. And I need lots of equipment, like very technical equipment to sail solo around the world. And I need enough money to cover my salary because it's going to take a while to sail solo around the world. And so it's an impossible dream. But then you come along, and for whatever reason, I don't know why, but you say, Jeff, I want you to fulfill your dream. And I got lots of money, you say, more than I know what to do with. And so I've got a check over here. You just tell me what you need. How much money do you need for like that boat and your salary and the equipment and the support team? Just name it. And so you write me the check, and I'm like, the trip is free. Ah! But don't think for a minute, just because it's free, it's not going to cost me anything. Because, well, I already told you it's going to cost me time. I'm going to be gone for a while. It's not something you do quickly, and that means that I'm going to be away from my wife, whom I love a lot. It's going to mean that I'm away from my kids, whom I love a lot, and it means I'm going to be away from my grandchildren, whom I love a lot. So that's going to cost me. And then it's going to cost me hard work because there's no one to delegate it. When you sail solo around the world, it's like you or nothing, right? So it's actually hard work to sail solo around the world. And what's more, this little dream of mine might even cost me my life, because I did a Google check, and it turns out other people have had the same dream, and a number of people have tried it, and a number of people have tried it have actually died trying to carry it out. So it might even cost me my life. So you can get something for free, and it can still cost you. And grace is a little bit like that. Yes, grace is free. You didn't deserve it. Don't feel bad, I didn't either. It's a free and undeserved gift, and it's handed over. Like, just, here you go. You don't deserve it, but guess what? You get it. But don't think for a moment, just because grace is free, that it's not going to cost you anything. Our text today says it's going to cost you a lot, actually. It means that it's going to cost you what I think is the most valuable thing you have, and that is your own life and the control you think you have over your own life. Because if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, I didn't say fan of Jesus. I'm not interested in any fans this morning. But if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, that means that you're going to love Him more than your family. You're going to love Him more than your own life. You're going to love Him more than anything you have or could ever have. And so I'm going to ask you one more time the same question I asked you at the beginning. Are you a fan of Jesus? Or are you a follower of Jesus? Let's pray.